about literally a week ago, because it was right after we were done with the show, this announcement came out on Twitter from the Disc Golf Pro Tour. Well, it came out everywhere, but Disc Golf Pro Tour has announced a new partnership with the PDGA Euro Tour to provide live stream coverage on 7 of the Euro Tour events and offer Pro Tour Silver Series points at all but one of those tournaments. It expands the number of silver events to 15 and offers pathway for more European players to earn a Pro Tour points and even a tour card for 2024. That's a quote from the Ultra World article. Essentially, this happened basically as soon as we got off air recording last week. Now, listening to that, looking at the announcement, good move for the Pro Tour. It's expanding to Europe. It's offering European players more opportunities to earn Pro Tour points. It's doing a lot of good things for the sport. So you might say, why was there any pushback at all? The timing of the announcement was what caused the pushback, because of those events, I believe 4 of the 7, or maybe 5, because I think one of the Euro Tour is doesn't matter. 4 of the 7 events Paul McBeth is playing and was previously announced about a month before this event to be playing those. Mm-hmm. Also, the first one that they're doing, the Kona-Piste Open, was already full at the time of this announcement. And then on top of all of that, it seemed that no players were aware this announcement was coming. So even if players did want to attend some of these events, yes, you can say on one side of the coin, it's happening in June, July, and August. They got plenty of time to plan. But on the other side of the coin, they're already planning their tour schedule. They're already planning their European trip, and they didn't know this was coming. Is it actually that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things? No. Let's start off with that. So what it basically created was this whole conspiracy of like, why was this announced so late? There were theories that Paul knew this ahead of time and planned his Euro Tour because of this. There were theories that Paul planned his Euro Tour and then the Pro Tour decided last second to do this. And then there were theories that this was just a pure coincidence. And I think that no 3 of them are all fully true. I think there's some true aspects to all except for the Paul one. I think Paul planned this Euro Tour. He's been talking about going to Europe for years, literally back to like 2020. So I think Paul planned his whole trip, no knowledge of what the Pro Tour was doing. Mm-hmm. I'll read some quotes from the article because the Pro Tour has definitely been working towards this for a while. But the thing that initially struck me weird is the Pro Tour is always, ever since Jeff Spring and them took over, very slow and methodical. Yeah. We want to implement tour cards. They do it over like a 4 or 5 year plan. We see them want to expand to Europe. We see them do that very slowly, it seemed, until now. Everything that they do, their coverage, we've seen them slowly step with more and more focus to live coverage. They never make a spur of the moment, snap our fingers, make it happen decision ever until this one. This one felt very much last second spur of the moment, which is what made me go, that's fishy. What's going on? Because obviously, again, Paul had announced before. This article, this is one of the reasons too. A lot of people were like, do an emergency grip lock and give us the information right now. When the Pro Tour first makes an announcement and there's something weird, you can almost guarantee throughout the week more information is going to come out. Mm-hmm. You can almost always guarantee it because people want to know. People are going to ask Jeff Springs and the people who are involved in it, and you're going to get a much clearer picture of what's going on. That's what this article, and Jeff Spring also went on the upshot. That's what this is kind of all provided, so we can now provide you with a lot more information. I have a theory. I'll provide you with that theory. You can see if you agree with my theory based on the facts that are out there. So let's just scroll down here. So the 7 events that have been going on, DGN will be streaming them. Essentially what will happen is they'll have FPO and MPO streams going on. It seems like a lot of these events do happen at the same time Pro Tour events are happening stateside. It seems like essentially what will happen is the MPO should be teeing off early enough in the morning, our time, Eastern time, that they should be finishing up about the time that FPO starts, the US event. So there shouldn't be any overlap as far as like...
Which means that nobody will be watching it.
Well, my first worry was, is this going to make... Once I saw like the coverage schedule and I saw like some of these events are happening the same time as Elite Series events happening, I was worried, like, is this going to make a decision that the viewer has to make between watching a Paul McBeth lead card and an FPO lead card? Mm-hmm. Like, are they going to be going on at the same time? And you're making the viewer choose, do I want to watch Paul or do I want to watch FPO?
Yeah.
that was one worry, but it seems like if that is an overlap at all, it might be for them like teeing off on the first hole or two FPO wise.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be a problem of like, if you want to watch both, you're going to be able to watch both.
Well, the problem is now if it's going to be before FPO, it's so early, nobody's going to watch it. And that's East Coast. Think about West Coast. They're going to be dead asleep. And so, like, yeah, you're basically now, I think you're banking on live viewership. At least you're banking on the Europeans.
I mean, it's like the European Open.
Right, but this is different because it's not the European Open. It's Paul McBeth playing an A tier, basically.
Essentially.
So like that's what I'm saying. Like I might watch it once, but you're not going to bank on me getting up. I mean, how early are they going to be starting? Like, are we talking like 6 in the morning?
No, probably about 8 a.m. our time, 7 a.m. our time.
Yeah, like that's I mean,
you'll get my viewership.
Okay, you get Hunter's viewership.
But I am an early riser. That is 4 a.m. West Coast time.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
and the FPO round will have already be. The FPO European round will already be finished at 7 a.m.
Yeah, so
you're not going to get much viewership there.
But I mean, and obviously, like it is Europe. I understand that. So like, there's only so much you can do, and I get they're trying to avoid the overlap, which I think is smart because I think if you overlap the FPO coverage, people will want to watch Paul playing at Konopiste and things of that nature. So that's a whole bag of worms that they did not want to have to open. So I get that. But you know, there's a lot of people in Europe hungry for disc golf, and they'll be able to watch too. So hopefully they're able to get some live viewers there. Because like I just don't see a ton of people 7, 8 in the morning throwing on a Silver Series. I don't know though. Maybe I'm just wrong. I mean, I'm sure I will tune in sometimes. But like,
the big factor
people are at work.
Big factor is other than a normal Silver Series, Paul McBeth will be in there.
Yeah, of course.
And pretty much will always be on lead card.
Yeah, so, I say they better hope he's on lead card because then nobody's definitely not going to watch.
If Paul's not on lead card, he'll still... Well, it depends on how they do coverage. There's a lot of questions still to be answered.
Paul's card just get filmed no matter what?
I'm sure Paul will be on all the feature cards, duh. But that's only for 4 of the events. Let's remember that too. There's 7 of them total. So they're covering the Konopiste Open, the Krokol... I'm going to butcher some of these. Just be aware. Konopiste Open, the Krokol Open, the Swedish Open, the Skellefteå Open, the Åland Open, the Alutagusi Open, and the Andalusia Open.
Brutal. But
all opens.
It'd be funny if you got them all perfect and then you're like the Swedish Open.
So let's scroll down to the announcement timing, which will because the European Tour, they talked about it a little bit. Obviously, they're very excited to have more live events coming. It does seem that the Pro Tour will be teaming up with a live streaming company. I believe the name is Pulsia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. We have heard reports, we didn't watch this, that Pulsia was the one that covered like the Finnish Nationals last year live, and apparently the coverage was pretty terrible. So it'll be interesting, will the Disc Golf Network's resources and like with them fix some of the problems that were going on?
Yeah. That's
one of the storylines to look at going into this. So let's look at Paul's European trip was announced about a month later or so, a few weeks later at least, this announcement comes out. So the announcement of the Pro Tour, this is from Ultra World, announcement of the Pro Tour's broader European move came on the heels of Paul McBeth announcing a 7-event European Tour during the 2023 season. He'll compete at 6 PDGA Euro Tour events, including the PCS Open, which is also a Pro Tour Elite Series event, along with the European Open. So that's why it's 4 of these new 7 ones they're announcing. Mm-hmm. And then Paul also has the PCS and the Pro Tour. McBeth had been planning a bigger European swing last season, but ultimately just played at the European Open. Another thing to keep in mind here, and to do this European Tour, Paul will be skipping 3 Elite Series events, DDO, Des Moines, Preserve, and an Elite Plus event of Portland Open to tour in Europe. So basically the reason Paul made this decision is he just wants to switch things up, grow his brand in Europe. He stated he'd been playing in Emporia, Kansas for 16 years straight, and the European swing will take him to some familiar stops, but also some brand new places. And he said, we just haven't seen where disc golf is in these countries, said McBeth. Now, this is the interesting point that has come out in this article. This is referring to Paul. He said that he did hear that the Pro Tour was considering offering live streaming coverage of more events in Europe, and that he had also learned some of his tour stops would offer Pro Tour silver points when he spoke to Spring in December about his decision to skip a big stretch of the Pro Tour events in the U.S. At that point, he had already traveled to Europe, but then this is Paul being quoted, "I told Jeff, I'm going regardless whether or not they're silver events, but do it. It would be awesome for European disc golf." So, first part of that article says...
wonder if that helped convince them.
The first part of the article says that he had learned some of his tour stops would offer silver points when he spoke to Spring in December, but then his quote makes it sound like that decision hadn't been made. Because he said he told Jeff, whether or not they're silver events he's still going, do it. It would be awesome for European disc golf.
Yeah.
I think the driving commonality here is that the Pro Tour is focused on growing professional disc golf across the world, and it seems like Paul's in a desire to encourage growth. Said spring, some pro players online expressed frustration about the announcement about more point earning opportunities coming up so close to the start of the season. Mm-hmm. Spring acknowledged they would have preferred the announcement to have been earlier, but it was a big decision that required a lot of preparation. We're 5 months out from when these events start. So I think if people want to adjust their schedule, we're still in the preseason. We're still about a month before we kick off. So he's basically saying they have time to do it. He also said the additions were not all of them. He also said the additions were not designed for U.S. players who would likely have to skip Elite Series events to play Euro Tour Silver ones.
That's a big point. So go ahead.
He also said this is really focused on European pros and growing the pro scene there. Here's what I will say, and this is where I had a problem when it was first announced. If you're going to give a heads up to any players, which Paul, we now have on record, did know. Not before he planned his trip, but he was aware somewhat of this coming. If you're going to give a heads up to a player, all the players need that heads up. Because this shouldn't have been something that took players by surprise. When we had Paul Ulibarri on Brody's show, The Disc Golf Hour, and he is the head of like a player association with the PDGA, he had no clue points were being offered at that point. And this was 24 hours after the announcement had happened. Right. He should have been someone who knew ahead of time so he could tell the players. B, again, we talked about, the Pro Tour doesn't snap the decisions, ever. Mm-hmm. That is just a pattern you can look at. Them in December not knowing and having Paul telling them whether or not we're going to, like, I'm going regardless, but do it. It would be awesome for European disc golf. And then a month later, they make this decision. To me, from the outside looking in, I think that contradicts what Jeff Spring was saying, that this decision was a big decision, required a lot of preparations, so on and so forth. Because if you don't know you're doing it in December, that means this was a pretty quick turnaround of like, hey, we've talked about it. So
just move it to next year and you avoid all these problems.
This is because
you have to, because like if it has nothing to do with Paul and they knew it was going to be a split decision and people's schedules were already made, they would have just moved it to next year.
Here's my...
Paul literally told Jeff Spring to do it. Like, he is within his rights to say that to Jeff Spring, but like, if you don't think the most influential player in the world telling you to like do something is going to not influence you, then you're nuts. Like, of course it is. Like, if I were Jeff Spring and Paul said something like that, I'd probably want to do it. Like, it's just how it is. Like, ooh.
Here's my now that we've seen the facts, we've seen what everyone's saying, here's my take on what happened. The Pro Tour, again, like I've said, has always been methodical. So I think the Pro Tour tested things with the Silver Series at the PCS Open last year. They live streamed the European Open, saw good success. Their next step this year, they made the PCS Open an Elite Series event before the European Open. And I think that they were beginning to think about, hey, what do we do with the Euro Tour? What if we made them silver events in the future? Mm-hmm. That'd be cool for the growth. Then that's kind of where things were at going into the year. I think they were happy with things being there. That's why they announced their schedule back in 2023, early 2022, for 2023. That's why they announced that schedule. It looks the way it does. December rolls around. Paul tells the Pro Tour, I'm skipping out on some big events. I'm doing the Euro Tour. I want to do it. Paul's reasoning, completely innocent. He wants to do it. And the Pro Tour has this idea already in the back of their mind of making these events a silver event in the future.
Yeah.
Now has a reason to go ahead and jump the gun and do it this year because it's going to have way more press. It's going to have way more attention if you already have Paul at these events. Yeah. So it's a better decision for the Pro Tour and for European disc golf to do it now. Mm-hmm. What they overlooked with this decision is it brings up a lot of questions. It wasn't very well received, and it makes it where players feel left out because
they were.
They were. The thing, though, is I don't think this changes any player's decision. I think if players knew this back in October, most of players' schedules would look about the same. I think that some players might choose to play the two silver events that are on either side of...
It's about the principle and the
But it's the principle of it. Absolutely. And people also were getting upset at me because I was saying they're handing Paul points, and they're like, well, Paul's giving up so many points, blah, blah, blah. Paul chose to give up points before he knew there were any silver events going on. Yeah. So Paul was essentially saying, I'm willing to take 0 Pro Tour points to go over to Europe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. With this decision, as long as Paul wins 2 of the 4 that he's playing, because you can only count 3 silver events, he already has 1 silver event win from a wraparound tournament. Yeah. As long as he wins 2 of the 4 that he's playing, which if you're a betting person, you're betting he's probably winning 3 of the 4, if not 4 of the 4 that he's playing during this. If he wins 2 of them, that is giving him 100 points, which is the equivalent of winning an Elite Series event over here. they are now gifting him those 100 points back.
Yeah.
That's what I don't like. I get that it probably won't matter at the end of the day. I get all of that. But with making this decision, yes, is it for the European players? Sure. I get that. It's giving European players a chance to win earn some points. Are any European players going to earn enough points during those 7 Silver Series events that only 3 can count, plus the European Open and the Sula Open to get to the Tour Championship? Basically. If they win 3 of them, the Sula Open and the European Open, yeah, they might, but then on that point, they need to come to the U.S. Tour anyways. So I don't like how this decision all shook down. I think that what we saw was they made a decision not thinking of the consequences as far as how it would be received from the public. It was received from the public in a lot of questions way, and it wasn't just all like good stuff. And I think they then are like, okay, let's just kind of like talk through it, let the public kind of know where we were at, all of that. And, you know, like I said, this move is good for the sport of disc golf. It's good for the Pro Tour. It would have been better if it happened announced now for next year. The streaming side, I'm all for it. Throw cameras over there with Paul over there. That makes a lot of sense. There is nothing wrong with the streaming side. I'm not for throwing points at it. I think throwing points at it when you're a month out wasn't a good look, and I think it was just an oversight. In my opinion.
And I feel like this is obvious in the way that you said everything, Hunter, but I feel like we have to like be extra clear with this. We do not question Paul in this at all. He didn't do anything wrong. No, it's pretty
obvious. Paul set his schedule well before he knew any of this.
People are just going to assume that we're coming after Paul, but
that's what was happening on Twitter.
Exactly. And we need to be clear with everybody. This has nothing to do with Paul doing anything wrong. Yeah, any player would be like, yeah, you should do that. Like that would be great. There's nothing wrong with him doing that.
My point. So I think a lot of people. I think if you look at the timing of the announcements, like that whole argument is pretty obvious. Like if you want to just say that like that the Pro Tour's decision had nothing to do with Paul, that's fine. Like whatever. But I think the writing is on the wall there. I think it's pretty obvious, and I'm kind of over that. But my thing is, and this is what people aren't talking about, is the Pro Tour is still trying to work on their own U.S. tour, and they are giving out Pro Tour points to events that aren't on U.S. soil, knowing that so their whole idea, like the one quote there from Jeff Spring is saying like we're still focused on our tour here, like we just want to like help European disc golf grow. If you make a ton of Silver Series abroad, you're going to end up eventually potentially splitting some of the tour. I mean, you have your best player going over there right now. What I think should be done, if you want I don't think you should try and tie the Euro Tour into the Disc Golf Pro Tour. I like a few European stops, but what I think they should be doing, if they want to help boost the European Tour and then grow that sport, they should be having it continue to be its separate entity, and maybe the top certain finishers on the Euro Tour get spots in the playoff. That would be, to me, make a little more sense, because that way you're not encouraging U.S. players to abandon the tour for European events and splitting up the tour.
Well, you're also encouraging like
I don't like that, because like that would have avoided this whole situation, because the points is like the filming, growing, that's great. But it's weird having a separate tour have points onto like these are two separate tours. This is not the same tour as the Euro Tour and the Disc Golf Pro Tour. So either they need to be the same thing, or you need to just like, I'm okay with maybe giving a couple spots. I mean like 1 or 2 spots from the Euro Tour, like top 2 finishers, and maybe let them into the playoff. Like that would be okay with me. That's fine. But I don't like them tying it in the same format, saying these events on a completely separate tour are going to be given points as if they are played on our tour, when it's not our tour. It's a different tour. The field is completely different. And there's so much work to be done on our own tour that like I see their initiative and I see the good behind it, get cameras out there, but I don't like them bridging it so directly. I'd rather see them let it be its own thing, give it some boosts. But in theory, the Euro Tour, like the goal should not be for the Euro Tour to integrate itself with the Pro Tour. It should be for the Euro Tour to thrive on its own. So why do the points thing and directly tie it to the tour, this tour? Like let it be its own thing and grow on its own, giving it help, but not tying it in. So that's the thing I think a lot of people are overlooking. They're just talking about, oh, conspiracy, this, that, and that's all there on the table. We've said our piece. But I think a lot of people are like, I question the strategy in which they're doing it with the points more so than even the sketchiness of the points. It's like, why I don't like the way they're tying it in that directly. That's what I was thinking.
No, it's I think there's a lot of great questions being asked. And again, my whole theory is just that it's a theory, because I'm just looking at the information provided. Yeah. The if you just take everyone's word at face value, what they read, you don't read into it, then this is a complete coincidence.
And here's the bottom
they were
line.
working towards it, and it took them from the Sula Open till January to cross the T's and dot the I's.
That's kind of what I'm saying. What I said is, if it is all coincidence, if it's all one giant coincidence, which is like a little bit far-fetched, but if it is, then I think it's still the Pro Tour's fault, because I think, number one, they knew about Paul before they made their announcement, so push it to next year. Save yourself the trouble. Or two, don't award silver points and save yourself the trouble. Like, it all still falls on the Pro Tour. Whether there was, even if it was a giant coincidence, they still had time to change their strategy. So I think their strategy was poor.
Well, I think what it also will do
that's
is,
what it comes down to.
because we were talking to Brody about this a little bit. There are, if I'm not mistaken, what Brody was saying is there's 2 silver events that kind of capstone the Sula Open and the European Open. Mm-hmm. There's one before the Sula Open and one after, whether you're in the U.S. or if you're in Europe. So if you're a U.S. pro and now these silver events are going over there, you're splitting the silver event field for what's here.
Yeah.
Because if I'm like
That's
Brody was
saying,
saying,
like,
he's
the
looking
tour.
at the silver events, and like the European field historically is way weaker depth of field wise than even the weakest silver event stateside.
Yeah, Statmando has
So
that.
why wouldn't you go over there?
Exactly. You're already going to be over there.
So now you're splitting, because now what might happen is now those events become stronger than the one stateside. Mm-hmm. But regardless, you now have sponsors and everything that have paid, and communities that have already put time and energy into this, and then now you're taking some of their field from them.
And this is not
send it to Europe.
This is not like an anti-Europe thing. It's like these are 2 different tours. I think people are going to, those lines, and because the PDGA is behind the Euro Tour, like those lines are going to get blurred so quickly. It's already happening. People are already just going to consider those Pro Tour events, because they're Silver Series events, when like these are 2 different tours, and the Pro Tour needs to look out for themselves before the European scene. Like that, it's the European scene has their own tour. The PDGA backs them. If the PDGA wants to put their money where their mouth is, like that's a tour that they back. The Pro Tour needs to be able to put their focus towards ours. And like I said, sending a few cameras over, whatever, is fine. But I don't like them blurring the lines there.
Well, I think what gets confusing is
because the European Tour should be able to exist on its own. Like, that's the goal. We want
the Disc Golf Network and the Disc Golf Pro Tour are 2 separate things. They can exist separately. The Euro Tour can be broadcast by the Disc Golf Network without any tie to the Disc Golf Pro Tour.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In my mind, that's where it should live.
Yeah.
And I don't even like your solution of the top Euro Tour people get into the playoffs. I personally think the Euro Tour can just be a way to earn points towards a tour card, to where people can like.
I like that even more. I like that
X
even
amount
more.
of people can earn X amount of points.
I like them being able
to get tour cards to come to the U.S. Because what you might also do is, let's say this continues to develop, right? And their silver events, and now you're like, okay, well, let's take a few more of the Euro Tour events and make them a few more Elite Series. Well, now what you're doing is you're even farther splitting the field, because now if I'm a European player, I have to start doing the math of when is it worth me traveling to the U.S. versus staying here and playing silver events and further Elite events? Like, when is the math? So now you might have a Christian Tatar think, this is years down the road, if this keeps developing and those turn into Elite Series, you might have Christian Tatar, the best FPO player in the world, be like, it doesn't really make that much sense for me to come to the U.S. until August, or maybe I'll only come to the U.S. through May, and then I can just do the Euro Tour the rest of it, because I can be closer to home, spend less travel money, and now you're losing the best FPO player in the world. I think there's a lot of negatives. That is, again, why my theory is that this decision was rushed, and that this decision was like a future decision, and once they discovered Paul was going to be over there, they were like, hey, let's capitalize on this, and pushed it and made it happen. That's why I have that theory, is because I think there's a lot of cons that if the Pro Tour would have sat down and thought through all, which they do for everything else, thought through all of the repercussions for their actions, they would have taken their slow stance like they do for everything else. It would have been a lot more of a put together package. They wouldn't have announced it after that's the other big thing. If this was their plan all along, you're telling me they're not announcing this before the Kona Peach Day Open registration even happens? Like, you're telling me they let an event
to me is just crazy. Yeah.
And then they do it? Like,
that's just not believable for me.
It's a stretch for me, but hey.
And like, we criticize that because we know that the Pro Tour is typically good about it. Like, that's where this is coming from. We're not like, oh, those Pro Tour, they're always screwing up. They typically have the right approach. Yes. So that's why this one just doesn't feel right.
It doesn't make sense to me. But again, whether it makes sense to me or not doesn't matter. This is all my theory.
This is not
anti-Paul.
No. Paul did nothing wrong.
Paul did nothing wrong. I've said that multiple times.
We have to say it so many times.
If people don't hear it,
we're going to get crushed.
If people don't hear it, they don't hear it. But I think the Pro Tour just rushed this decision to capitalize. I think it was a good, hearted decision, because I think, again, they were like, we have Paul over there. That's going to make this way more media want to cover it. It's better to do it now than next year when we might not have Paul over there. I think it was all well-intended decision, but I think because they rushed it, they overlooked a bunch of steps that is now making it have pushback. All in all, though, good decision, good for the sport, bad timing. That's what I'll say on it.